want to say thank you to our sponsors, South African Wood Preservers Association. Visit their website to learn a little bit more on what they're doing. And this subject is, of course, of interest to them. And it is something that they're very much part of promoting, this thinking around mass timber. We might touch on the supply chain, look at upstream and downstream, the socioeconomic dimensions thereof in the conversation that we want to have. So we want to say thank you to our sponsor for this event. We are the Regenerative Collaborative South Africa. For those of you who don't know us, it's a non-profit company. And we work together with a few volunteers who are generous in sharing the knowledge in supporting the mission that we are on, which is really to get this regenerative design thinking to be operational, to be something that is operationalized and is first understood and known and valued. So really working on the bleeding edge, if you like, or cutting edge of green building. You'll find us on LinkedIn as well as Facebook, which is where we'll post for now is the events. And what we try and do all the time with these events is that they must be informative and inspirational. So we bring in these industry experts, some are colleagues, and we would have liked it to be in person. At some point, it will be for a networking opportunity, because sometimes you're working on a project on your own and you're there in your office and you're looking for some ideas to unlock a certain part of it and you don't know what to do, but then there's somebody in the industry that's actually grappling with the same questions that you may have on your project, and then they can provide some kind of support and input. Social media, that's where we'll be posting some of the things and these events that we are doing. And that's our Gmail address. And you will get that address when we send you some information for having attended. The previous events you'll find on the greennet.co.za website. We've covered net positive water, an introduction to the Living Building Challenge, and we'll organize some of these or portions thereof later this year. So some of them are quite deep, technical, that is. Others, it's high-level concepts, and depending on how deep you want to go with the subject, we can also organize a session with you and your team or your organization, and we can chat a little bit on some of these broad concepts. Okay, so now we're getting to the part on why we are here. Let me do the introductions, and then we can start having the conversation with everyone that's here. So we've got Emma Ayesu-Koranteng, who's a senior lecturer at Nelson Mandela University and a chartered construction manager. And David Elliott is a serial entrepreneur and creative with extensive experience in the construction industry. But they are speaking as founders of the Mass Timber Focus Group. Now, the presentation they had given touched on insight into the key challenges that South Africa needs to overcome. And then Gerard is with us, and I haven't seen Gerrit yet, but they're both from the Forest Stewardship Council. Their presentation had touched on the sustainable properties of mass timber. And then we have Tessa Brunette. She's an architect, integrator, and building envelope designer who leads the Arab Cape Town office. She shared a project example and her experience with the design and construction process, as well as the working relationship with the manufacturer. So we'll ask for insight on that process, the design process. So Jamie had shared a presentation that touched on his company as XLAM as a manufacturer and looked at some of the properties of the material. But we will get to speak about that because, Tessa was involved in the process, and Emma and David, you have got some insight as well from a manufacturer's perspective. So the way it will work, just for the benefit of the audience, is I'll begin with an opening salvo of questions for each one of the panelists. After that, you can post your questions on the chat box, or you can just simply put your hand up, but use the Teams hand. Put the hand up there on Teams, and I'll hopefully spot you and then give the mic over to you, and then you can ask your question, and then we'll get that ball rolling. So I'll start off with this process. So I hope we all understand. I'll ask the questions, each one, then you get a view on their perspectives, and thereafter open it up to the rest of the floor. If you can ask technical questions, or if you want to know on policy and regulations and so on. So the idea is for you to walk away and get practical value from this. I mentioned this last time, David, to you and Emma. I think you had been quoted as saying that you're hoping that by 2025, that each province in South Africa will have at least one mass timber building. Now, why do you feel that this is necessary, and which sector do you think will have the most impact?
Sure, Thulani, and just to correct you there, it wasn't every province. I don't want to overpromise or overprophesy on that, but certainly in South Africa, we trust that by 2025 we should have our first mass timber building, all being one in a commercial sector. I think the reality is that mass timber is not suited to all sectors, and you'll recall Denise's question in the last meeting regarding is it an answer to mass housing, and we said currently in its current format it isn't, but there might be an opportunity through hybridization or composite panels to maybe contribute in that space. But I think currently what we see around the world is that the sectors that are being most affected are in the commercial space are office blocks, typically mid-rise office blocks. They have done higher rise, but mid-rise makes a lot of sense. In this country, it probably would make a lot of sense on the 3 to 5 story buildings. Obviously, with COVID, office has taken a huge knock, and potentially there will remain a surplus in the office sector for a while. The other area is mass residential, both on a normal multi-family sort of kind of a mid-tier family, the mid to higher end. And also we're currently looking at a student housing opportunity here in Cape Town, and it's going back into council, and that might be promising, but we need to see if the costs will work. So those are kind of the sectors that we think that are probably going to be first affected by the mass timber builds.
Oh, right. That's interesting. So obviously, folks, we need people to have the skills to do this work. And Emma, what's your view on the role of academia in this?
All right, thank you very much for your question. Before I answer that, I just wanted to add to what David was saying. Sure. I think so far what we see is that the universities of higher learning are leading in terms of, looking at or adopting mass timber. It kind of builds into our endeavors to inform our AEC programs. Now, our university per se, we do have a project that has experienced a couple of hurdles, but it's still on the table. I know that a number of the universities also have projects in the pipeline. So that is demonstrative, and it helps the public to actually see what we're talking about. It's one thing to talk about mass timber, and it's another when you can physically see it. So the idea is to have it publicized and have it opened to everyone when we start construction and all of that. So at least for now, with everything that's happening, I know that the institutions, about 2 or 3 universities, have projects in the pipeline. Ours, we were just waiting for assembly and all of that, but it's still on the table, as I've said. All right. When it comes to the skills, well, so far, I think South Africa, if you look at the built environment professionals, we are highly skilled, but we are skilled in concrete and steel. We love concrete. I mean, I'm a concrete person, and I found myself in wood just about a few years ago. But if we look at the AECs, I think there's great focus on the architects and the engineers and how to design in wood. However, if we look at the programs themselves, there's very little component that covers wood design. So institutions like mine, I think I can only more or less speak for mine, but I know that the UPs of this world and others are also pushing in that direction. So while we are embarking on demonstrative buildings, we are also incorporating it into some sort of like a capstone project where students participate. We bring in our architects, we bring in our construction managers, we bring in our quantity surveyors and the likes. So the skills we have, yes, we focus on concrete and steel and so on, but it isn't much of it slightly is a bit of a challenge to transition, but there are obviously short learning programs that some universities are looking at, and also training to ensure that our existing skill set can just almost move from the traditional concrete into designing in mass timber. What I must note is that on most of these projects, well, if I take mine, for example, we had our international experts on it. So there was transfer of skills, and that's very important, because if we are to push the adoption of mass timber, our own local experts need to gain some sort of experience, and the only way to do that is to partner with international counterparts, and then while we work on projects, there is the transfer of skills. So far, there is a lot of movement with the various universities on the upskilling or the future upskilling of our AECs, but it is in the pipeline. but it goes hand in hand with the pilot project. I'm not sure if I answered your question very well.
Yes, you did. Thanks for covering that. Thanks, Gerrit. I missed you there, and we're happy to have you here as also the technical advisor for the FSC. Now, how would you describe because I want to touch on just the sustainability angle a little bit, just high level. How would you describe the mass timber supply chain in South Africa from a sustainability perspective?
Yeah, we prefer the term responsible use, not sustainable use, because sustainability is quite a myth. In South Africa, if you're buying SA pine, you are most likely buying what we FSC certified pine, because most of the growers in South Africa are FSC certified, and most of the big producers are also FSC certified. And for those who do not know, FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, it's all about doing responsible sourcing your timber. And responsibility means basically that you look after the environment, the natural environment, you look after the needs of the people, but you also do so in an economically viable manner. You balance all three of those things. And the FSC objective is to make sure that we preserve and protect our forests, world's forests, as much as possible. I don't know, some statistic that is quite horrific, but I mean, we're losing natural forests at a rate of about 1 football field a second as we see. So those are forests that are gone for, probably forever. So FSC tries to bring the opposite in, say, we can use our forests in a responsible manner and without destroying them. I mean, forestry is call it a profession, has been going for thousands of years, and the forestry models that are applied in responsible forest use today show that for many call it hundreds of years, these forests have been harvested over and over again, and they're still as productive as they were the first day. But that's because we do it in a responsible manner, and that's where FSC comes in, is to check on whether that's actually the case. People get a certificate, they can put the label on the product, and you as an architect or somebody in the industry can then hopefully source those FSC products, which is something that is sadly not the case in South Africa. I mean, I suppose pine, for roof trusses and things like that. At the moment, you start coming to the sort of more visible stuff like your window frames, your door frames and things, you just see stuff from Indonesia and all over the world, and very little of that is certified.
Thanks for covering that and for touching on sustainability and responsible use. That's one way of looking at it, and for covering the South African issue. But there will be questions, of course, later on in that discussion. Thanks, Gerrit. And Tessa, from your view, may you please just touch on your experience with the design process, in that, of course, it was not necessarily a mass timber building, but the facade used mass timber. Could you touch on that and your comments on your experience in designing the process from specifying and getting the material there and then working with the manufacturer?
Mm-hmm. Sure thing. Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't the structural frame of the building, but I think it is the largest use of mass timber thus far in South Africa. So I think there's something to be said there about the scale, which may it only continue, exactly as David was touching on earlier. I do also just want to say, in terms of skills, I do want to foreground the fact that we do have local mass timber skills in South Africa. We at Arup have been investing quite significantly in our own design team, who've been working on mass timber projects around the world. So they're people based in Cape Town, like here, who have real life mass timber design skills. So just to reinforce the fact that the design skills are growing and are currently in the country. Clearly it's the beginning, but they are here. So then in terms of the design process on the ridge, which is where we had that mass timber CLT facade, it was a very interesting process at that stage, which was a few years ago now. We were all learning. So from a design team perspective, we had this idea and we got client sign off on it, which was the first step. I think having a brave client is really necessary, especially those years ago. I think now it's changing every year, and it's changing the more we talk about it. So the more we talk, the better. And so our design process internally within the design team was really exciting, because at that stage it was something new. And certainly from our perspective at Arup, we were engaging a lot with our global team, who had a lot of experience. So we've got structural engineers, facade engineers, and fire engineers who are all very experienced working with timber. So we were very reliant on their expertise, real life expertise, and learning from them and bringing those lessons to the project. So the design process itself was, yeah, as I said, very exciting, and but it was quite smooth because we designed a modular system. So there was one result, or one panel that had to be in the end fabricated, and then that was rolled out. So we tried to reduce the task for ourselves. Then, as soon as our design intent was agreed upon and we engaged directly with the supply chain, being Jamie as well as a facade subcontractor, Gustain and Horak, typically coming from the aluminium and glazing world, never having really dealt with timber before. And we quite consciously engaged with those two suppliers because we knew both of them and there's a level of trust. And we knew that certainly with the facade subcontractor, they had an ability to deal with this complex new material and very consciously be engaged with coordination with the different materials that were new. So that was a very necessary part of the process. During that stage 4, kind of late stage 3 design process, we spoke a lot with Jamie in terms of what he could do, what he could achieve through his fabrication, and that involved a lot of tweaks and a lot of changes to the design. And it was very iterative, lots of steps involved there. And then once there were shop drawings in place and we were all satisfied with what was on paper, we had a very intensive mock-up process. So that is something that is not very normal in the South African market. It's not very normal for the client to be willing to pay for mock-ups. So that's unusual in itself, but it was completely necessary in this process. And that mock-up process, where we had a smaller panel that had to be fabricated and then installed, highlighted quite a few issues related to the accuracy and related to interfacing between different materials and how this panel would be assembled. So that was very necessary. And then following that mock-up, there was another iterative process to redesign, well, not redesign, but to improve the design and further refine the design. And then another fabricator came on board who just had accurate CNC equipment, who was able to cut the panels very accurately, which then met the needs of a very high performance facade. So once that process went through, then we had another mock-up, which wasn't planned, but again, necessary. And that went on the building and all was well. So as soon as that process happened, then because it was modular and because it was one type of panel that was repeated in essence, then it rolled. And it happened really quickly. And I think that really just goes to show the benefits of mass timber when it comes to the fact of being fabricated in the factory and then installed on site. There are significant benefits to be had there through reducing the on-site time. And those were realized on the project.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for touching on that, because I had a question. I have a question for Jamie. Jamie Smiley from XLAM. Thanks for joining us there, Jamie. And the question was around that iterative process, which I imagined it would be. And from you as a manufacturer, is there a preferred method of collaboration on your side, Jamie? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks. So yeah, the project with Arab was also one of our first big projects to work through, and they were a great partner to work with in developing the process that we go through. We've kind of refined our process since that project, but it still works along the same type of lines. Initially, we'll get drawings from architects or engineer, and we typically asking for these in some type of 3D format. The manufacturing of CLT is very, very well placed to work with BIM type of technology. So the models that we're using and designing from, say the Rivet models or the ArchiCAD models that are the design models and the engineering models, are the same models that we are now using to cut the panels with. So at the time we were doing the Arab project, we didn't have the CNC capabilities to cut to that kind of millimeter accuracy. And now we've upgraded. We do have an industrial robot that we are cutting with. So you have to understand it is timber. It's not aluminium. So one of the issues we found in the project was that timber, you're working on a 1.5 to 3 mil tolerance, which is still tight for building industry. When you're interfacing with other components such as aluminium, you have to take the joints and the detailing into account. So typically we ask for the drawings in a 3D format. We will do initial proposals now by panelizing the design and saying, this is how we could manufacture the panels. And then there's a kind of a backwards and forwards shop drawing process where we will then go into the details of how they're put together and how they're joined and what order they would be delivered to site in. Yeah, I would say that the big thing is the BIM type of formats. This is a technology that takes huge advantage of that and that whole process of transferring information.
Oh, excellent. Oh, excellent. There's some questions in the chat, and maybe let me take those two, and then, we'll give folks an opportunity to also ask. So Matthew had a question on, are there books that you can recommend for detailing mass timber structures? Were there any other references? Yes, there are links that Tini shared there, but are there other books, maybe Tessa, you made reference to, or David, that you promote on detailing?
I'll take a look, Thulani, and see if I can post some as we go.
Okay. I think
Sorry,
you're thinking
if
there.
I could just give a note on that.
Yeah, please, Jamie.
Stora Enso is one of the major manufacturers of CLT in Europe. They have factories all around Europe, and they have a fantastic design guide which you can just download free from their website. Obviously, the detailing is more geared towards European specs, so the installation values and certain of the components are different, but the basics of the detailing is very good there. So that's one I would advise.
Could you please post the name there? I heard it sounds like a Zulu word to me, so I might write it in Zulu. So could you write it there for us?
I will do.
Thank you. Good. And then Luigi had a question. Luigi says, I've found a lot of resistance from not only clients, but especially engineers and even architects in using mass timber structures. Real built examples will really change this. But until then, what can we refer to for a successful example of a built work locally? Any comments? Anyone of you can take it, Tessa?
The ridge. It's not a structural system, but it's the use of mass timber at commercial scale, and the costs were equitable. So as soon as carbon starts becoming more of a thing in South Africa, that will be an argument for clients. Yeah, and until, like David's mentioned, some projects that they're working on, and I think that momentum will really snowball. But I agree. I mean, I teach at university as well, and I'm astounded at how some of the academics, never mind the students, can be quite resistant. So all I can say is keep pushing. There's successful mass timber buildings that have been built around the world. It's up to us to be driving the change in our industry, and we just have to keep on pushing that. We have to get these buildings built.
Do you have a case study of it? I was just thinking about the content of your presentation, if it were converted into a publication. Is there something like that, proprietary, all considered, that would be produced? Yeah. Because I think the desire from Luigi is to study it, and for most of us who are on this call, is to study it as opposed to seeing it. Because your presentation was very informative, and it seems like there's even more, that can be shared. Yeah.
That's
anyway, I'm not putting you on a spot, but
it's a good question. So the quick answer is no. I mean, I've written loads of articles, but it's all, you've got like 3 paragraphs to summarize a process into. So it's definitely something I'll think about. Thank you, Thulani, for suggesting.
And then, sorry, Thulani.
Sure, David, go for it.
I'm just posting in the chat there a project that was done by Earthworld Architects, which is not strictly mass timber, but it's the same principle. And I think it actually does qualify as mass timber. It's basically plywood on steroids. And instead of using LVL, they've used built up plywood. And what they've done at the Africa campus up in Pretoria, it's called the Future Africa Innovation Campus, is really astounding. And it's commercial scale. It's phenomenal. So if you have a look at that link there, that'll give you an idea of what's already happened in the country.
Cool. Thank you.
And also just from our side, we've got a number of larger residential projects that we've done mainly around Cape Town area, a few down the Garden Route. And then we are currently working on a project with Wits University, the Origin building. So there's offices within a building that we're doing there. So there are more and more projects popping up.
And Jamie, are you publishing these? I find in SA, our industry does not publish as much as it should and could. Is there any thoughts of publishing some of those projects that you're working on?
Publish as in what? Detailing and
Yeah, detailing,
like,
putting it in a magazine, in a journal, on your website, and then sharing the how.
so yeah, we definitely, you know, more than anything, it's just images. It's kind of marketing images that we put on the website and Instagram. But yeah, it's definitely an idea for us to start putting more of that detailing and information about the projects together. I know that there's one project on Arc Daily by Paul Elliott. It's a project that we worked on, which has got quite a lot of information in there. It's got all of the plans and detailing on that.
Okay.
Jamie, I've just posted it on the chat for you. So there's a link there now to Thulani to House Elliott.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Tessa, your comment?
I just wanted to touch on what David was mentioning in terms of the earthworks building. I think we do need to also recognize, and it's important for everyone on the call, that although this call is about mass timber, timber as a material can be used in so many other ways. And there was a question at the beginning related to the industries that mass timber was best applicable to. But I would also like to just add that timber frames, for instance, that's a well-known technology, and most of the Northern Hemisphere residential market is timber frame buildings, and they perform really well if you design and detail them correctly and maintain them correctly. So that is also an incredibly low carbon solution that arguably could be constructed in a more recognizable way for the general industry. So I do just want to make that point.
Good point. I was asked the other day to get someone who can do ikukwane, and there are not many who can, but this man was available. He used to work for the late king, and he's got an eye for the different materials to use in different applications and the properties of this material, which is wonderful. Now this question that David you have was something similar. I was also interested in, and then I'm trying to rein myself in as well, because I also have a boatload of questions on this. I don't know, Gerrit, if you saw that. It's directed at you, and what are your comments on that?
Yeah, okay, so the situation in South Africa, in terms of suppliers from South Africa, I mean, the supply chain has moved very much into the fiber, pulp and paper and packaging. I mean, in terms of fiber, more than 60% of the world's timber today goes into pulp paper and then ultimately packaging. And with the online shopping growing as well, that's just going through the roof as well. So, and if you think of companies like Mondi, for instance, that used to be a huge supplier of structural timber, they supply zero today, or almost zero. Yeah, the other side of the coin is also, I'm just giving some background and then I'll provide some other answers. The other side of the coin is also that the fiber people like Sappi and Mondi, they're moving more and more towards eucalyptus, which is not really suitable for structural timber, or plywood maybe, but not so much for structural because of the qualities of eucalyptus. It splits very easy, so your conversion factor, your conversion ratio is very low. You lose a lot of timber when you do convert it from a round log into planks. So I would say, and all of that, of course, has happened because of supply and demand. The demand for pulp and paper, went through the roof, whereas the demand for structural timber and timber for other purposes, it's not really gone anywhere, really. South Africa still does export quite a bit of timber, both fiber and structural timber. But if the demand comes back, then I'm quite convinced that companies will respond to it. The only thing that we need to understand is that a tree doesn't grow overnight. A pine tree that you want to convert into something structural, it's going to take you at least 20 years. So if you start demanding now, it's going to take quite a while before that timber is going to become available. So there's a lot of stuff that will play into this. But ultimately, if demand's there, the companies will respond. I mean, that's the way business works. That's the way economies work. There is, however, obviously a lot of timber available elsewhere in the world. I mean, from Australia, New Zealand, they grow a lot of structural timber there, and then of course South America, North America a lot, and then Europe as well. So from an import perspective, no, there's absolutely no limit, but it's obviously then a cost factor that's going to play a role there. David, I don't know if I've covered more of this. You also asked something about pellets and all of it. Those are, unfortunately, the product, the timber that's used for producing pellets and other low quality timber products, it's normally sort of the rubbish, the stuff that you don't want to use for anything else that would go into fuel, like pellets, for instance, the pellets that they use in the freight industry. That's the lowest of low quality that goes into pellets. But again, the demands is there, the companies will respond. It's just going to take a while.
On the manufacturing side, we actually have done a number of panels out of eucalyptus already. We've also used the billy gum. I don't know if anybody knows about billy gum type of eucalyptus, where they take young eucalyptus and finger planting it while it's wet. So the cycle is much shorter. They're using 8 or 9-year-old trees rather than 18 or 20-year-old trees. And the engineered timber does allow for upgrading these type of materials. We can buy fairly low grade materials, optimize it by chopping out the bad parts and re-finger jointing it and then laminating it together. Specifically with the eucalyptus, which has got such a bad name because of how much it moves. Once you start engineering these and laminating them together, it does make it a much more stable product.
And that source would be from South Africa. You're getting these from South Africa, Jamie?
Yes, Billy Gum is a specific company in KwaZulu-Natal that's doing that. And then, yeah, the eucalyptus that we purchasing is local. And I know that the large producers have been working on their species of eucalyptus and hybridizing different versions of the trees. So it's kind of a specific eucalyptus tree that they're growing now, which has less knots and has less cracking. But that said, it still does have knots and does crack a lot.
Okay. Gerard?
Yes, Thulani. Yeah, just to add to what my colleague Gerrit said, I have posted a link to our FSC database, which is a publicly available tool. And just in terms of using it, just click on that link and then you would obviously select what country you're looking for certified suppliers in. And then you'll go down to the next level and choose product category, and you'll scroll down and you'll choose wood for construction. So if you basically put South Africa as a filter, wood for construction, you'll get about 20 odd companies that are certified for construction timber. Okay. It includes some of your big sawmills like Merensky, Zingizi, York. It also includes some of your door manufacturers and your joinery. And obviously, this is where the specifiers play a role, is that obviously it's really about educating your suppliers and obviously together with FSC in terms of ensuring that your chain of custody actually goes further down the supply chain, because that's often what happens. It may stop at the sawmill. Okay. And then obviously there may be a fabricator or someone that's involved in further processing that is not certified. So obviously if you want to make the claim on your build, then obviously we have to ensure that the full chain of custody is in place. Okay, so I think that's obviously just important to understand that. And that's obviously where, yes, there is some work that needs to be done, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are still quite a number of suppliers in the construction timber side that are certified.
Okay, cool. There is another question here, and I think it's directed to Jamie or Tessa. How do you manage the inaccuracies in the digital 3D models that designers submit? There are usually a lot of inaccuracies. This is Shinedum.
As a designer, I'll leave that one over to Jamie.
We typically work off the engineer's drawings, and it is a process. The engineering drawings are very accurate. We will do the 3D model and it'll go backwards and forwards a few times and everybody's checking over. That's why the BIM model is such a great resource for this type of project, because it's one model that everybody is working on. We find that the majority of the inaccuracies and the problems come in where people are working with different sets of drawings and then you're trying to coordinate them. Ideally, you want one building model and everybody works off that.
Okay. And then Tamba asked a question here, Tessa. I'm more interested on the energy efficient side of things. What methods or systems have you used in this regard?
Energy efficiency of the timber.
The building. So the building, when you use this material, I'd assume it's about the actual building. When you use it, like what are those impacts on the energy performance of the structure?
It's great. Timber is a really excellent insulator. So yeah, it's great. You like, for instance, in the ridge where we used CLT as the structure in the facade, so not the primary structure, the facade, We didn't need to add insulation to that because the timber is such an effective insulator. Just also for anyone who's looking at standard detailing, if you look at European examples or North American, you'll see that they have insulation there. That's because their climate's very different to ours. So we just need to be cognizant of that. Like in our climate in Cape Town, we didn't need insulation. That may differ it will differ in other climates. Yeah, I don't think there's any specific challenge with timber, especially because it's such a good insulator. So it really helps, actually. It's a benefit.
I'd imagine they are obviously, if they're still pursuing any certification, they're monitoring and measuring this building consumption and so on.
Yeah, so just in terms of the overall energy performance of the building, yeah, I mean, for instance, on the project that I was talking about, that is one of our key interrogations. And so there's loads of systems about that. I could talk, that's a whole separate conversation. But the way that the timber contributed to that was through being a good insulator. But it wasn't the driver of the energy performance. That's a whole separate thing and really important to be talking about. But the timber is a little bit different.
Okay. There is another question here. How did you deal? And this is for you, Tessa. You can't do a hospital pass now to Jamie.
That's fine.
How did you deal with insect and vermin proofing on that Cape Town building?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really important to think about that, especially insects and fungi. So those are two key aspects, and how that's dealt with starts from species selection. So different species of timber have different resistance to different things. So that's quite important to consider. In terms of the design and detailing, where we were using timber on the ridge in the facade, because it's the weather line of the building, it was particularly important. If you're dealing with primary structure, your timber is inside the building and it's protected from the rain already, so you can do different things. You can treat it in different ways. It's a different response. For us, on the outside of the building, we had cladding, which was not mass timber. That's just a thermally treated pine plank, basically. And so the thermally treated aspect of it makes the timber inert. In essence, it like burns all of the sugars out, in essence. So there's nothing for the chochas to eat. Like, I'm simplifying, and clearly we've got the technical experts as well on the call, but that's how that aspect is made less appealing for all the chochas and the fungi. Then for the mass timber itself, for the CLT, which is the actual structure of the facade, that is wrapped in a breathable membrane. So the purpose of that is to separate it from the water and the rain as much as possible. There was also quite careful detailing that Jamie and ourselves worked through with counter battens to fix the cladding onto the CLT, so that the counter battens are there to just get the best line of structure and to stop visible lines on the outside as much as possible. But even the battens have slopes on the top, so that when rain does get into that cavity, the rain falls off and any condensation falls off, because you want to keep water away from that as much as possible. Then the CLT, which is inside this membrane, as a last step, like something to just further help protect the piece of CLT, that is treated with a treatment. And that, in this instance, because it's inside the weather line, it can be a slightly less aggressive treatment. And yeah, I hope that answers.
Okay, I think Emma wants to weigh in on this. Please go ahead, Emma.
Thank you. So I think when it comes to the treatment, well, Jamie and I have spoken extensively about this. So for our project, what we did was we looked at a brush-on treatment option, and we spoke to some experts locally. So it's almost like we came up with a purpose-made type of a treatment for our project. So whenever we get to the point of building, we will actually treat it on site. So it's just some chemicals, and that would be brushed on. And I think it's quite durable, and from all the technical data, it's as good as the impregnated treatment. Maybe Jamie will say I'm wrong, but this is a step in the right direction because the panels are large, so we have to find alternative treatment options. And so our brush on, the option that we chose, is something that if anybody's interested in it, they can contact me. And I think I did share it with Jamie as well some time back. This is also something that is available. Thanks.
Sorry, Emma, when you say our project, which one are you referring to?
The Nelson Mandela University CLT project at the George campus. It's still on the table. It's in the pipeline, yes.
You haven't broken new ground yet, have you?
So we've experienced a couple of challenges, and one of those is the cost. Our CLT sourced from Europe, so already just to transport it here, it doubled or tripled. It was just ridiculous just to bring it here. And then there were also a number of challenges. So right now, everything is done, design is done, you name it. We just need to press the button and start site activities. Okay. So that's where we are at the moment. Okay. But the entire design process was quite interesting because it's like a domino or a puzzle rather. One piece fits into another, and the coordination among the team actually informs what will happen on site. So if there's good coordination, I mean, the assembly and everything else is smooth, whereas if things are not pre-planned, you experience a couple of challenges later on. So it's been a good experience so far. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful. Jamie, you've got a comment on this? And then I haven't lost the questions from folks on the chat. I'll get to them just now. Please go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, just on the treatments, I see that Bruce is on here as well. Bruce is from SOPA, which is Wood Treaters Association. There are specific regulations for structural timber in South Africa for levels of treatment, and these depend on where you are in the country. Mass timber and cross-laminated timber especially is a difficult product to treat because the panels are so large that you can't really fit them in treatment tanks. We have done treatment prior to actually manufacturing the panels, but this is an issue that is worldwide, how to treat timbers. And it's not something that's dealt with that much because the majority of the stuff being produced in Europe doesn't require a treatment.
Okay. It's interesting you made mention of a standard. Do you want to say more? Are there standards on mass timber that folks can reference?
Are.
They're published.
They definitely are. So
okay.
The SOPAS, there is a standard for treatment on timber, and that I think is even in SANS 10400 in the normal building code, saying what treatments need to be. And then there is a standard for cross-laminated timber, SANS 8892, which is a South African standard for the manufacturing of cross-laminated timber.
Okay. And what other entities are there that ensure safety and durability of these materials and so on? Are there other organizations that are taking care of that?
If you want to be certified as a manufacturer to the SANS 8892, you would have to be registered and audited by either SATIS or SABS, and they come in and check the factories to make sure that you are building according to the standard. So that's the major protection that's out there.
Okay, good. Tessa?
The elephant in the room is fire. So we don't have specific codes as yet in South Africa related to fire, particularly with regards connections. So for mass timber buildings, it's likely that there will need to be testing of the specific connection details for that specific project undertaken, but there's a lot of effort and interrogation from academia as well as interested parties going into that. So it's not an insurmountable challenge. It's just something to keep in mind.
And would that be UCT that's looking at that?
Richard Wallace at the University of Stellenbosch is leading that interrogation.
Wallace. Okay.
I'm sure there's another colleague of his also at Stellies who I just can't recall his name. But...
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. And there's a question here from Yona to David and Jamie. Are any of the larger commercial developers and or landlords seriously considering the application of structural mass timber systems in the near future? 1. 2, does the viability figures and buildability stack up?
From our side, we do have a number of projects which are in the pipeline, some multi-story. The largest is a 7-story building. We have worked with the guys at the waterfront who were fantastic. They were very eager to get this going with the ridge, and I think that they probably have plans for the future. The costs of these type of buildings, there's a reason why it's taken off so much in Europe and Australia and the States, is because at scale on larger projects, this stuff becomes very, very economical. It goes up quickly, your returns are quicker, you get tenants in quicker. So while the cost of the material might seem like it's more expensive than traditional builds, when you look at it one-on-one, if you look at the development costs of these projects and the time that they take, they do work out cheaper on scale. So I would say anything from a 4 to 12-story building, you're going to make a huge saving.
Okay. Tessa?
I do just want to say that the barrier, so yes is the answer to the question from my perspective. There are developers who are really keen to be using this, especially if they're trying to appeal to international anything, because the carbon conversation is much more progressed internationally. And then also if they're looking at anything related to ESG. So it does come down to the clients. And then, of course, the personal interest that the developers may have. But a barrier that I've seen with these projects has been our cost consulting industry and the fact that it's very difficult for our QS colleagues to actually cost the system and the actual design. So what they need in order to cost it is actually a very high level of detail from the design team. So it puts everyone working in this risk situation, potentially, unless you have a very generous client, for quite an extended period of time. And then even when they get this very detailed scheme, they aren't the main contractors and the timber, like Jamie's, but colleagues and also bigger, who can cost it with enough certainty, and also the QSs don't have enough of those numbers to hand. If you ask a QS how much a meter of brick wall will be, they don't even have to look, they can tell you. And if it's something that they're not familiar with, it's much harder for them to give costs, and they are much more risk averse. So it becomes tricky, especially with quantifying the benefits of P&Gs.
Yeah, that's interesting. There is I mean, I haven't read it yet. It's a thesis. I think it's by Stefanus van der Westhuizen of, I think, Zutari, published in 2020, the University of Stellenbosch, looking at development costs of a concrete structure in a mass timber building. That might have the answer, or at least direct one to one. So I think that's worth consideration. It's a master's thesis. There is a question here, Gerrit. I think when you touched a little bit on the chain of custody, I think there's interest in you unpacking that a little bit as to which direction. I don't know. I would assume if you able to just explain just that chain of custody when it comes to this such timber, if it's going to be used in South Africa, for instance, maybe a project in Johannesburg, what would that look like?
Because the chain of custody, I mean, what happens, the process works as such. You've got your forest or your plantation, which is the situation in South Africa. So you have the standard, which that company gets audited against. You know, it's quite intensive audits. They then get certified. They get a certificate. They then get the right to make a claim that the products that they produce is FSC certified. So if I then if I sell my timber from my forest or plantation to, say, for instance, a sawmill, the sawmill now also has to have a chain of custody certificate in place. So every time there's a change in legal ownership of the product, there has to be a chain of custody in place, right? So that the product gets traced all the way from the forest right to the retailer or to the construction site. So, because everyone and the auditors, these things get audited on an annual basis. So the auditors will go in, they will check your inflow, your outflow, they balance the things. Does everything make sense? And can we actually trace this thing back to the forest of origin? So that is for all products that are FSC certified. So if you buy a piece of structural timber in a shop somewhere and it's got an FSC label on it, you will be able to trace that timber all the way back to the forest that it originated from. So, and that could be, you know, anywhere in the world, of course, because the entire world is subject. I can't, Gerard can maybe give the latest figures, but I think it's currently about 43,000 chain of custody certificates globally, and I cannot remember the number of forests, Gerard.
45,000.
45,
230 million hectares.
Certified, yeah.
And then in South Africa, 1.4 million hectares.
Yes, so there's quite a lot of, I mean, especially when we talk about the high grade timbers, like the stuff that you would normally get from the Congo Basin or the natural forest from South America or the natural forest in Southeast Asia, you know, that is a bit of a different story. There's not a lot of that, but the rest, pines and the spruces and all of those things, the softwoods, there's plenty supply. Certified supply.
It's certified in the world, but in Mzansi, is there enough in SA?
So, well, that's a question. I mean, just going back to my first comment and also
David,
Jamie's James' comments on that. It's a matter of, demand and how quickly the demand grows. Obviously, the demand grows at 100% overnight. It's not going to be there. But if the demand grows over, say, 5 years, at a lower rate, then South Africa can easily supply that, because, as I said, there's timber being exported, structural timber is being exported from South Africa for various reasons. But immediately, if the local demand is there, immediately that can return back into the South African market, as opposed to. There are also some companies that would be able to switch from pulp supply to what we call saw timber supply in a very short period of time. As JB pointed out, they could maybe, instead of leaving your pines in the plantation for 15 years, you just leave them there for a couple of years longer. But, there are so many factors that play into that thing, and so many variables in there. I'd be hesitant to say that, to speak on behalf of those people. But I think, just going back to my first point, it all depends on the growth in demand.
And just a note to that, David, but do you think this conversation we're having is premature, or do you feel it's the right time for the industry to be having these discussions, or what's your view on that?
No, it's long overdue, I think. Very well overdue. So,
and that's what you feel will drive the required capacity on the latent potential that's there.
Yeah, I understand a little bit about the architectural world. I'm a landscape architect myself, but so not so much in the construction, but I have a little bit of a knowledge of it. So for probably 20 years, from the forestry industry and from the certification world, we've been trying to speak to architects to start thinking about it, to start making more responsible choices. I understand it's not always the architect's choice or idea. Often it's the client that demands what's going to be used. But I think the other thing is also that through architecture, we can also educate the consumers out there, because the architecture is a very visible component in our human environment. And the consumers in South Africa are totally unaware, not totally, but very, very low level of awareness of this kind of thing. And they are the people that will ultimately drive these processes. And that's what FSC is all about, is ultimately for consumers to make a choice when they go to a shop, or they go to an architect, or they go wherever, that they choose the better product, the certified product, instead of the other one.
Okay, good. David?
Just Thulani, going back to that query earlier regarding the commercial developers, the redefines and growth points and others of the country. What is their appetite like? And as Tessa said, climate change is definitely driving the appetite for this. But the practicalities of it is that you need demand in the tenant space. So we mentioned earlier that COVID is, because of work from home and other things, has affected the commercial office space. And although developers remain keen, they need to find that demand, and there still is demand in the mixed use. And I think a comment just on the trends around the world is that government has led often, and we're seeing in this country that we've got universities leading with wanting to do these on their campuses. And I think that's an important part to lead this process. As Gerrit says, we need to create demand. That's what the Mass Timber Focus Group's about, is trying to just spread awareness and increase the knowledge and understanding that the design professionals need, so they feel comfortable specifying these products. So I think the developers are certainly keen, and the query, what the trends you're seeing globally is that you can get a premium for these buildings in terms of rentals. So that's, the costs are not totally prohibitive, but there is a challenge on the costs, and I just wanted to mention this briefly. So locally, and hence my question for Gerrit was, it's vital that there can be some shift away from paper pulp to these structural materials, because I understand that the governments have not encouraged planting over the last 20 years. So there hasn't been, as far as I understand, an increase in our resources, which is a problem. But one of the benefits of CLT as one aspect of mass timber is that you can use the smaller diameter logs. So the plantations can be younger, and there's maybe some advantage there. As Gerrit was saying earlier, it's not necessary to use the hardwoods. The softwoods are the most common probably in the world for CLT and glulam. So that is possible, maybe more for CLT than glulam. The treatment that Jamie was talking about earlier, it's, if you're using South African source timber, you can then treat it locally, and you don't have the issues that you mentioned earlier for bringing stuff in from Europe. There is, however, one other problem, and I think what Jamie and the guys have started locally is to start with the residential space, smaller projects, and maybe that's a better way to increase demand. So you have a numerical demand rather than one large commercial building. And the reason I say that is that it's then easier to manage the kind of the takeoff stage of mass timber locally. Around the world, unfortunately, mass timber has taken off like a rocket. And you've got literally thousands of mass timber buildings that have been built already. Recently, just in the States, it's been just over 1,000 either built or in planning. So this trend is not going away. South Africa is lagging way behind. Australia is streets ahead of us in the last decade and a half. So this is not new. And obviously Europe and the Norwegians, they even further, they've been doing this for many decades. So our one challenge, and I did mention this to Jamie previously, was that if we are doing our first commercial building, unless Jamie's plant has progressed a bit further in terms of capacity and quality, because normally when you ramp your capacity, your quality is challenging to manage. It's likely that the first commercial building will be based on imports from potentially Europe or elsewhere, maybe even Australia. And with that comes the query that was raised around the treatment. And right now, I see Brad's on the call as well, is that the prices, lumber prices around the world have shot up. So due to COVID and the freight challenges, the lumber prices shot up in not just the States, but also Europe, because the Americans went to Europe to go and try and manage their stockpiles. So the prices shot up. They did come down again, but then they bounced up again. And we're hoping that maybe not in this first quarter, but certainly in the second quarter, they'll come down again, and it won't affect that potential or bring it over for the first commercial building. So this is a couple of things, and that's why that question to Gerrit was very important around, as the demand grows, maybe in that residential space that the forestry guys and the resource guys are able to swing that demand if the price is right. And obviously, if the guys, as Gerrit says, if the demand is there and the price is very high, there's no problem swapping, switching that demand or switching that supply chain. But it can't be ridiculously priced.
Yes, and there's a comment there from Chris Greensmith. He thinks that there are bigger projects that are needed, like 3 to 6 multi-story buildings and warehouses and mass timber to drive the prices. Matthew, okay, that's sorted. You've been answered. Okay, and Matthew, your first question, I wasn't sure if that was just said tongue in cheek, but anyway, Tessa, you want to go for it?
Yona asked a question about
buy-in.
Buy-in at universities, if there is buy-in or any initiatives from universities to reposition their curriculum and training of architects to view mass timber as a real practical option in the near future. So my experience is at UCT, and Yona, I know you have exposure in Gauteng to those universities. So at UCT, no, there are students who are interested, and increasingly more so every year, and that's fantastic. I haven't seen such a drive from the studio staff, so that's a task that needs to be dealt with. But I know UCT does have a new sustainability MPhil that's coming into place, but I don't know how much that'll carry over to the architect, to the first to third years, for instance. But it's definitely something that needs to be tackled. However, at University of Stellenbosch, there is a professor there who's dealing with design aspects, but it's not an architectural program. So, and then also at NMU, we've got Emma on the call, and so it'll be interesting to hear from her if there's any of those conscious links being made with the architectural program at NMMU.
Yeah, and maybe David, would there be Emma?
I just wanted to add to what Tessa was saying. Tessa, at Nelson Mandela University, so throughout in the past 2 or so years, so the reason for our pilot project was to have some sort of influence on our AEC program. So we actually have architecture, engineering, and construction, including quantity surveying. So the project is supposed to bring our students, we're supposed to involve them, and then of course throughout, whether it's the design phase and all of that, the idea was for them to learn and to have some sort of idea of what we're doing. I must say though that there is buy-in from the various departments because they've all been part of the project. So for instance, even though we had our architect, local and international, we had architects from the Department of Architecture, we had construction management professors and the likes involved in the project, including myself being part of it. And then of course the quantity surveyors. So yes, the universities are moving. We have recently recurriculated. So I think the next recurriculum stage in the future will incorporate a bit of mass timber. I must just note that modules such as construction technology, construction management, we are in the process. My module, for example, I have incorporated mass timber in it, and so is a module something like construction technology. So it is happening, and of course the Stellenbosch's, us, the UPs are leading, and I believe now, I think University of KwaZulu-Natal and also WITS is also looking into enhancing their programs to incorporate these mass timber technologies that we're talking about. Thanks.
Cool. 2 comments, if I may. David and Emma, for MTFG, if there's a way of plotting these projects, it would be nice for them to be at one place somewhere. I'm not giving you a task, but I'm just saying, for in line with your work, it would be good to see that, because we are known for working in silos, and it's at places like these where we get to know that, hey, there's a project there, hey, there's another one there, wow, and then now 5, 6, now that 10, 12, so it would be nice. Then the second thing, maybe I'll just save that for a little bit later. Gerrit, your comment, and we'll go just one last round of comments, and then we're going to have to close our session. Please, Gerrit.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say that there's almost no awareness about the FSC certification and the environmental benefits that brings. There's also almost no awareness about the environmental consequences of producing cement and concrete. And those two, you build both of those and you can obviously work hand in hand to promote this objective.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So the comment I wanted to make is, obviously we would like mass timber to be known and understood and to be used and so on. And maybe we're reaching an age where, the same many years back when reinforced concrete came about and it was the material to use. So mass timber should be known and be seen as part of maybe an approach that could be used. And obviously there would need to be more understanding. And I think the likes of the NHBRC, I don't know your experience with working with them, being involved, DST, Science and Technology, and others. So beyond the academia and just our private party as professionals in this call, would be good for us for it to get there. And of course, when these projects are published and more people read about them and they see that it's possible and it's doable, and there are wonderful clients that Tessa is working with that give her the permission to fail, and they're able to test things and to get them right. When we get more of those, then at least we might have a take up of this material without being fixated or obsessed with it only in the scope of what the built environment does. Okay, that was interesting. Okay, are there any final comments that you'd like to make? I'll start with you, David, just in closing on this subject.
Thanks, Thulani. Yeah, it was good to be part of a conversation again. And just to all your delegates, there's 70 odd here, is that, it takes each one to make some contribution. And even a conversation, people say talking is a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. It's a contribution to the awareness of what mass timber is. And South Africa is behind the rest of the world, and it's up to all of us to catch up, because this is the only renewable structural material that can be used at scale in the world. So this is not a fad. It's something that we need to catch up on. Thanks, Thulani, and to all the delegates.
Thanks, David. Emma?
Thank you. I think from my side, this is all about awareness, and we are, working together with, my university and with the MTFG to ensure that we get the word out there. And that's about it. Thanks.
Good. Gerrit?
No, just we really need to start taking this seriously, and especially in the architecture industry. It's about time. Thanks.
Good. Tessa?
Matthew's question hasn't been answered. I just wondered if we can answer that and then close.
What I'm trying to get at is, I fully agree with a lot of the comments in terms of getting to scale quickly to allow the cheaper buildings to be more economically viable. But what I'm interested in is the hard data. If you graphed all the info that we have from around the world and adjusted for South African economic conditions, what would the graph look like if you graphed cost versus height for mass timber versus conventional construction by typology. It's a lot of data, it's a lot of stuff, but I think it's a kind of graph that would help everyone a lot in the construction industry. I'm not, as an architect, I'm not going to waste 3 weeks or 6 weeks of design on a stage 1 to 2 presentation if I don't know that it's viable. I'm just not going to do it in a commercial environment. So, we need to know where we can peg our targets for design so that when we boldly present to the growth points of the world, they go, okay, yeah. And then you say, here's the graph, here's the data. Otherwise, they'll just say, sorry, we don't know, we're not interested. You need to be able to defend your design. Does that make sense?
Yep. Tessa?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I liked your comment. I think it's a very good question. I don't know if that data exists. It may very well exist, just not with South African relevant numbers. I don't believe it exists in South Africa. So that's definitely something that I'm keeping in mind for what I must look out for or try to generate. In terms of rules of thumb, Matt, they are I didn't look at all those links, so I don't know what's in them, but I know that I have a book on my bookshelf that I keep looking at that does have rules of thumb. So it's out there. It's available, and I would encourage you to look for that.
Okay.
Do you mind sharing the name of the book?
What is the name of the book? Yeah.
I keep on looking up. I'll have to get up. So let me finish, and then I'll get up and get the book. It's blue. I can see it.
You can post it on the downers there on the chat.
I will once I've gotten up to fetch it.
Sorry, Tessa, if I just mentioned to Thulani and to Matthew that the Mass Timber Focus Group is partnered with a few guys around the world, and some of them, if they're not too busy, are willing to help with those early questions of framing grids and the typical things that architects are trying to figure out. It doesn't resolve all the cost issues. That has to be done locally, and it takes some effort.
Makes sense.
Thanks.
Cool. All right, Jamie, let's get your comment, and then Tessa will close.
I think the key things to look out for is look out for those certificates. Watch out for FSC, look for the SATIS or the SAN certified materials. We are doing more and more projects in South Africa, so we are gathering more data to be able to give you that type of cost comparison, height versus cost. Obviously, our situation is a little bit different to the rest of the world. Our cost of labor is very low, so on a small scale, it is difficult to compete. We're kind of cost comparative, but on a large scale, it will be cheaper. And yeah, the factory is always open for people if they want to come and see what the stuff actually looks like and get a hand on it.
Excellent. Tessa, the book, and then your last comment, and then we've got to close the session.
It's called Structural Engineering for Architects. So it's quite appropriate and helpful for architects.
All right.
I'll find a link on Amazon. But can I also make my closing
Please
statement?
make your last comment, yeah.
So I just want to reiterate what Gerrit said as well, and David and everyone else. Like, this is such a necessary shift. I think that it's so easy for barriers to be created where actually it's our job as designers to understand the challenges so that we can overcome them. None of these challenges are insurmountable. It's up to us to design them, and the biggest task is getting our developer and quantity surveying colleagues to be on the same page. But there are arguments to frame around that, and it's not insurmountable. So exciting times.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your generosity in sharing your knowledge. Because when that happens, then we can have this change that we want. We are actually having a conversation on shifting a paradigm here. So we need to share that knowledge and let people be able to read stuff, take it apart, query it, interrogate. And so, and other folks who are on this call, also in the audience, please get in touch with us. And if there's anybody else you've spoken to, feel free to get in touch with them, even on the chat, post your email address there and things like that. We would like this to happen. But a sort of a central place where we can all go to would be good. And if there's anything that comes off that, of your articles, all you guys, please share that with us. Then we'll disseminate the information. Marloes, I'll hand over to you now to close for us, please.
Thanks, Thulani. Just to remind you, we're doing these webinars on a monthly basis. And next month, we're doing a webinar on green existing homes. In March, we're planning one on energy performance certificates and net zero existing buildings. And the month thereafter on regenerative permaculture. Follow us on LinkedIn and on Facebook to keep up to date with the webinars that we're doing. These are all the links. Oh yeah, also a shout out if there's somebody on the call that is willing to volunteer for a social media volunteering position within the Regenerative Collaborative, please reach out to us. We would love to have a youngster, or doesn't necessarily have to be a youngster, but they're usually better at it, to help us with posting and doing our social media. Just reach out to us on our email or on Facebook or LinkedIn. The Living Future Institute is providing a education accreditation around living buildings. So if you're interested in learning more about Living Building Challenge and Living Future accreditation, just visit this link at the bottom and you can get some accreditation around living buildings. And then lastly, a very big thank you to our sponsor of today, the South African Wood Preservation Association. We really appreciate the contribution, which allows us to do the CPD validation for you all. Thank you for supporting us. And then a big thank you to our speakers for making the time to spend this hour and a half with us. And we really, really appreciate your inputs. And yeah, big thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And then to our RCSA team, thanks guys, we're all volunteers, we're all doing this for the love of the job that we're doing and the love of the planet. So really thank you for all your efforts and in putting these webinars together and the message that the RCSA is trying to get out there. And with that, I want to thank you and I want to wish you a very, very good evening. I'm going to make a promise, which I'm not sure if I'm going to make. I'm going to try to summarize all the comments in the chat box and put it on an email to you, to all the people that have registered for this event. You might have to wait for it for a week, but yeah, I enjoyed all the questions. I think there's so much knowledge in there. So I'm going to try to summarize all that in an email with all the links that have been posted as well to the publications and all that. So that we'll summarize and put in an email to you guys. So again, thank you very, very much. And we hope to see you next month on the 24th of February for our next webinar.